So hello, my friends. Uh, I have for a long time, being kind of an engineer kind of guy, trying to understand how this all reality works. Been looking to try to identify kind of the structural, the fundamentals of what we experience and how, what animates it, what's the basis of the whole thing. I've looked into and have friends who are working in 0 point energy, the supposed field from which everything emerges, and so on. One source, and other places, and other things as well, the electric universe people, and so on. But the kind of the one source I go back to kind of regularly is this one, and this is a book called the Kybalion. And it is written by 3 initiatives, which are unknown people. But what it is they call it the Hermetic philosophy. And what this is purports to be is the basic kind of, you could call it a philosophy, but it's the understanding, the description by Hermes Trismegistus about the underlying nature of how this reality works. Now, Hermes first showed up in Egypt, and by the name of Thoth, or Thoth, T-O-T-H, who was rather famous in those kinds of terms, as a kind of a major player in Egypt. There are pictures of him on the walls in some of the buildings down there. And then apparently he was kind of supernatural or something. So he lived certainly hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And he then shows up in Greece as Hermes. And the Greeks put the appellation on that, calls him Trismegistus, thrice great. So they say he's 3 times great. He's great. So he's this special kind of source who was constant and had a presence in those periods back in BC and early AD kind of areas. Hermes was obviously, in every case they describe him, was extremely wise. He was the inventor of astrology and the discoverer of alchemy, or maybe the other way around. So he's a big hitter. He's a big guy. And so when, although it's hard to kind of pull the thread of authorship directly into current kind of documents and so on, and nevertheless, it rings very true to me. And the ideas show up all over the place. The whole idea is as above, so below is from Hermes Trismegistus. So there are these ideas that populate all the kind of approaches and the explanations and theories and philosophies that we have from many other kind of sources and places, that if you run back down to the origins, they come to Hermes. So if you're trying to understand how this reality works, then for my money, you go back to Hermes and you say, what does Hermes say? And Hermes has 7 Hermetic principles that are the basic kind of notions of how reality works. And the first one, presumably the most important one, is that the all is mind. The universe is mental. Okay? The all is mind. The universe is mental. Now you think about that for a minute. What it says is there is nothing else except mind. Everything else is a derivative of just mind. And so mind is, if you want to go and you want to say, who am I at the most fundamental level? I am mind. And of course, there are sources like the Gnostic Gospels and others that would suggest that we are all components of the source, the mind stuff that is the source of everything. And so each of us is essentially God. That they say that explicitly. We're all essentially an element of God. We're not derived from God. We're an element of God. We're an integral part of this source of everything. But the source of everything is mind. It is nothing but mind. And so then you say to yourself, okay, so if it's all mind, it gets pretty weird pretty fast because, you look at physical reality and say, how in the world does that turn out to be mind? And many of us all are familiar with different kind of analysts and whoever that all run around doing workshops and other kinds of things, explaining to us in one way or another how this all mind works. But let me suggest to you that there are some really essential kind of characteristics here that if you get your arms around or your head around this, that allow us to think about who the new human is that is going to come up and populate this new world. So if you start with the whole Hermetic principle that says you're all mind, then you go to a book like this one, Letting Go. And Letting Go is written by David Hawkins. The subtitle is The Pathway of Surrender, Letting Go. This is an extraordinarily interesting and powerful and important book as far as I'm concerned. Now, David Hawkins, as you all may know, is the originator of the whole idea of muscle testing, kinesiology. The whole idea is that the essence of who you are manifests itself. You can tap in to the essence of who you are by what essentially is an intuitive mechanism, which is muscle testing. And they start with putting your arm out and trying to see, and lean on it and ask a question, and it'll tell you whether it's true or not. In kind of more operational or easier to use terms, you can do muscle testing and across your fingers, and you can put in here and try to see how much. You ask a question, and if the thing doesn't open, and the answer is no, and if it opens, then the answer is yes. And I have used that regularly in situations where I need some kind of a quick answer to something. And there are whole disciplines that are built around the whole principles of kinesiology and muscle testing and the ability to access the essential aspects of who we are, to go through all of the layers of social and whatever kinds of physical and other kinds of kind of barriers that, if you will, that surround the essence of who we are, this mental piece of who we are. And so I find David Hawkins very insightful. And what David Hawkins says is essentially that there are two aspects of mind, two components of your mind. And one of them is thoughts, and one of them is emotions. And that those are the kind of operational kind of components of your mind, the ones that we can most easily relate to and attach to and manipulate or change or affect, right? Thoughts and emotions. And so this is really quite interesting. So let's kind of reverse engineer this. Because what it says is essentially that if everything is mind, that is to say, everything, your health, your future, your relationships, your everything is mind, then the two kind of levers that you have for affecting your mind, i.e., everything, are your thoughts and your emotions, right? And that and there isn't anything else at that level. There's nothing else. That's all you got. And so what this turns into is very interesting and powerful kind of ideas relative to kind of who we are and what we can do and how we can affect our future, our reality and our future. What David says is about thoughts to start with. He says a thought is actually a thing. It has energy. It has an energy pattern. The more energy we give it, the more power it has to manifest itself physically. Now, most of you or many of you would know that Penny Kelly has done a good bit of work in the past with Dr. William Levengood in terms of determining just the mechanism by which thoughts turn into physical reality. It's all about like consciousness is causal, right? So it's the same as the idea of that you can change your mind and you can get whatever the secret, right? The idea behind the secret that you can visualize what kind of future you want and whatever. It's directly on the line of Neville Goddard and what he talks about. Neville Goddard, if you will remember, talks about how you do visualization of what you want, and then you put your attention and your emotions associated with it. It's also the Silva method, which I'm doing. I'm going through a course about that right now. And the Silva method is all about the Jose Silva and the extraordinary kind of success that he's had in helping people get their minds in a position to where they can manifest and influence their reality. It's the same thing. It's all about. So you got mind and you've got emotions. Now, let me tell you a couple of other things that David Hawkins had to say. I want to read you a couple of sections. He says, now, and this is kind of interesting. He says, don't look for answers for problems and issues. Now, this is important going into this space where we're going into. We're going into a period of time where it's going to be increasingly chaotic, where it's unpredictable in terms that we've never understood before, where all of the principles and the stuff that has worked for us in the past in terms of logic and assumptions and other kind of things are not going to work because we're reconfiguring from one era and to another one. And the kind of the assumptions of the previous era kind of go away and new ones emerge. And during that transition, everything's up for grabs and it's very confusing because all you got to do is look around now and everything we thought was true and who we thought was honest and all that kind of stuff is just, this is 1984 in your face kind of stuff. And so So in that kind of space, you're trying to say, how do I navigate? What do I do? How do I make sense? How, instead of capitulating and getting driven downstream by everybody with their narrative and what they're trying to do, tell you, how do you rise to the occasion and make sense out of things in this kind of emerging new human way? How do you rise up into this evolutionary jump to becoming this new kind of entity that has this expanded awareness of both who we are and how the reality works? Well, in terms of looking for answers, what David says is that instead of looking for answers, you let go of the feelings behind the question. When we are surrendered on the feelings behind the question, we can let go of any other feelings that we might have about what seems to be the problem. Okay, so wait a second. What this essentially says to me is that all of everything is mental, right? It exists, and we are an integral part of that. And the way that we play in that space is between our thoughts and our emotions. And so if our thoughts and our emotions were essentially unencumbered, if there weren't any constraints, there wasn't religion and family and society and government and education and all these things that are in place to essentially constrain the essence of who we are. If there weren't all those things that we built up over all these years, if there wasn't all these guys who are trying to change the narrative and tell you to think about something else, if there wasn't all that stuff, everything that there is underneath that. The essence and the answers to everything is that. That's how intuition works. You can plumb into boom and you get the answer, and there's no logic to it or anything. And it's because you've worked your way down through all of the design, all of these barriers that have been designed and from the beginning, and told you what you couldn't do and how the government would come after you and you get thrown in jail, and they generate fear, and all of that kind of stuff are all constraints. They're all barriers to accessing the essence of who we are in terms of thinking and emotions. All of our emotions are modified. They're modulated by all of these externalities. And they are engineered, of course, by the powers that be. They're trying, that's what it's all about. It's all about control and how to do that. And so what David is saying is, you don't think about the problem. The essence of this book is letting go. Get that? It is letting go of all of that stuff, all of those constraints. Letting yourself just rise up and be unconstrained by all of the crap and the concerns and the thoughts about the future and everything else, and just letting the essence of who we are rise to be able to, we can access it directly. That's a really big idea that is really quite interesting to me. And so what it says is, and this is kind of what Silva says and other kinds of folks, Joe Dispenza, any number of other kind of people, is that this is not about kind of a logical effort to try to work your way down to say, what works or what won't, or the pros or the cons or some other kind of thing. That's very much kind of a derivative of all these constraints, because you're trying to make logic based upon these externalities as you understand them. How does science work? How does logic work? How does the law work? How does social psychology work, how do people behave, all of those kinds of things are all part of making any kind of an analysis of what the situation is. And what David Hawkins says, no, don't think about the problem. I mean, you have to tee it up. And this is what the Silva guys say. You tee it up, but you don't think about it. You don't look for answers. Instead, you let go of the whole thing, the question and the feelings behind the question. The question, this is interesting and important for another reason, and that is that in the same way that how you enter this kind of underlying essence, this animating kind of layer that is below and throughout all of who we are. If you one of the major ways in which people that one of the major things that are a derivative of all these systems around us that are constraining us are all these attempts to generate fear. The whole idea of fear is directly always related to the future. You're always concerned about something that's going to happen later on, not that's happening right now, but that is somehow potentially out on the horizon, and that you won't be able to pay your bills, or you won't be able to do this, or you won't be able to get kissed, or whatever the thing is that's important to you at the time. And it is this kind of orientation. Remember, you're thinking and you're focusing your problem. You're articulating the problem in terms of this future, and it's turning into, I don't have enough money, or I can't do this, or they'll never do that, or she's going to tell me to get out, or whatever the thing is. And what David Hawkins is saying, no. Don't associate yourself with any of the emotional things that are associated with the future. Essentially, are associated with the problem. Essentially, it's about letting go. How do you get to the place where you let all of that stuff go? That's what Neville Goddard essentially talked about. He says you put your desires up into the space, and you let go of it, and you attach emotions to it, because emotions are very important to this, and they're very important in the Silva method. They're important to Joe Dispenza and the other kinds of folks. But the idea is not to kind of think about it in these terms of feeling the emotion about where it's going to go or what it's going to do. And just finally, just to make this point and to see where it all goes. What he said, what David Hawkins says, is one delightful discovery we will make is that our capacity for love is far beyond what we have ever dreamed. The more we let go, the more loving we become, and more and more of our life will be spent doing things that we love to do with people who we feel increasingly love. Wow. Okay. Why is that? Why is that? Because at the essence, if you will, this mental field that is there, quantum physicists will tell you, or at least my friends will tell you, that they think that the 0-point energy field from which all reality in this space emanates and grows is essentially love. So turn it the other way around and say, so if everything is mental, and the kind of the animating or the activating kind of field from which everything happens is mental. And what does that mean? Well, it doesn't, mental doesn't describe what it's about. It just kind of talks about its origins. It's a mental thing. And what these folks are trying to say, my friends and others are saying, what that mental source is essentially love. And the the plane, the field, the underlying field from which everything emerges is love. My friend Hal Puthoff, who's a well-known kind of quantum physicist, used to tell me, he told me once, he said, you know, if we ever figure out how to, with some kind of machinery, convert the 0-point energy field into electricity, so we build a generator, right, that accesses all this energy from the field. It's everywhere, and we coalesce it in some kind of way and then turn it into electricity. He says, you know, my guess is that when you walk by the machine, you're gonna love the machine, and the machine's gonna love you, because you're gonna have this concentration of this underlying field of love. That's the essence. The essence, if you want to describe this essence of this mental everything, what you say is that it is love, right? And the way that you kind of manipulate and that you develop and build on that kind of basic mental field is through thoughts and through emotions. And if you are unconstrained by all of the you know, like I say, the social and the mental, the religious and all the governmental and all those kinds of things, if you find a way to really let go, what you do is the love comes up, right? And how does that show up in your life? Well, it shows up in beauty, among other things. I mean, I'm convinced that when you look around and you see things that are beautiful, what it is the love leaking through, right? That it's showing up and you resonate inside of you. And when you have these extraordinary relationships with people and you have these loving kind of relationships with them, that it is this unencumbered access to the underlying field that animates everything. And what David Hawkins says is that if you figure out how to let go of these things, then what you find out is that you cannot believe how broad and how unencumbered all your loving is, and that you can, in fact, you know, love in ways and more broadly than any way that you've ever thought of before. I've often heard of all these people saying that we're all one and we should love everyone. And the logical guy in me says, yeah, I don't know quite how that one works, because when I run down the street and I look at people, I got no way of knowing whether I love them or how I would feel. And there's a logical mismatch between that basic kind of idea and this whole notion of oneness of everything. And I don't know how to make the link, the kind of the intellectual link between that kind of idea. This is what he said. This is what David Hawkins is saying. He's saying that when the problem is because you have built all these barriers. They're not just barriers. What they are is they're filters. And and it's like gels on a light in a spotlight in a theater, right? And you put a colored one and a colored one and a colored one, and each one changes the color as it comes through to when in the end it's maybe brown, where it started off being all the whole spectrum of white light. And so this is all about, I would argue, the new human, and how you become what this next step of humanity is, and how this whole new world works, that this is this new world, and what are the kind of the basic principles. Okay? So, okay, remember what Hawkins says? You cannot believe if you let go and you get rid of all of that stuff, how much love that you have. That sounds like 1,000 years of peace to me. I mean, if you're loving everybody, why aren't you're not trying to beat on anybody or kill anybody or solve your problems that way. You get along with people. I mean, you don't have fights, I mean, in general, you don't have really serious kind of things with people that you really love. And so did you follow that? I mean, that there's a real interesting kind of angle, vector into the middle of all that thing that starts to say, there is a way, there is a little sliver into this new world that's starting to show up that you can see. And what it's about is letting go of everything. Now, if you let go of everything, like I implied before, is you don't live in fear, right? I mean, you've let go of everything, so you don't have fear. You don't have fear because you're part of, I mean, in terms that I think about, I'm part of God, I mean, why should I be afraid? And the universe is, I'm part of the universe, and it's very benign and helpful. And by the way, the essence of the whole thing is love. And so why should I be afraid? And by the way, then, as we also intimated, this consciousness is causal. This all turns into you generate a reality that is consistent with that mindset. And so the world turns out to be really kind of nice. And it's all full of really cool people like all the ones that are, part of my larger community, wonderful folks and people who show up here at Berkeley Springs and so on. It's just kind of, it all comes from the way you see, you enter this whole space. And whether you are constrained and concerned and driven and all of those kinds of words and terms are all about, that's not letting go. David Hawkins, this has extraordinary implications, because what I've suggested is, of course, that we're talking about everything. We're talking about how do you engage the mental aspects, which are everything in this reality. How do you engage those? Well, if you engage them through your mind and through your emotion, as I said way at the beginning, that you can change everything. Now, David Hawkins has in this book has all kinds of examples about how people have healed themselves from all these diseases that everybody said they were going to die from, and so on and on and on, just one after another and after another, because they got to the place where they just let go of it all. You've all heard of the situation where somebody is just finally up against the wall and they have no options and they just let go, and then all kinds of new things kind of that's essentially what you're about here. So this has implications to your health. It has implications to your emotional kind of situation. It has implications, and he builds all these cases about how when you get into that kind of space, when you act that way, then it draws all kinds of people, and people like you and so on. I think the most interesting story that I heard him that he talked about here was that he was telling he's going and doing workshops or seminars and telling all these stories about how everybody's been healed and everything. And how this is, they got to let go and everything. And some guy raises his hand in the question and answer period. He raises his hand and says, but Dr. Hawkins, you're wearing glasses. And why in the world are you wearing glasses if you think that you can get rid of anything, any problems that you got? And it just stopped him up short. And he says, I said to the guy, I've never thought about it before. He said, I just kind of assumed that was a part of what, like we all do. It's part of aging or whatever it happens to be. And he said, I'm going to try this. And so he took off his glasses and just went forward saying, I'm letting go and we're going to see what happens here. And now listen, I think about doing this thing, but I'll tell you what, I can drive without glasses. I can do a whole lot of things about it. He couldn't. He not only couldn't read, but it was hard. It's hard for him to even drive and be able to see the road and stuff. And there was a bunch of things that he had really bad vision. And he's starting to be concerned about this because he thought, I'm going to drive off the road or hit somebody or some other kind of thing. How can I do this? And this little voice came to him and said, you'll see what you need to see and you won't see what you don't need to see. And so he kind of bought that. And he went forward and, he did things a lot more carefully and so on. And, but he just stayed with it. And in 6 weeks, at about the 6-week period, all of a sudden, boom, everything changed. And it's almost like everything let go. And his eyesight went back to being 20/20 plus, and he could read anything in the dark, anytime, anything. And it was that way for the rest of his life. Now that's pretty interesting. I guess if you had cancer and you got rid of cancer by just letting go, that would be pretty dramatic to you, I'm sure. But for somebody like me, I found that was interestingly powerful. That something that is been told us, in everything. So, hey, you're getting old. It's old eyesight. It's presbyopia. Everybody gets it, and there's nothing you can do about it. I've talked to ophthalmologists and optometrists and all kinds of things. They said, sorry, it's the way it works. But what I know, for instance, is that the Eskimos, the Inuits, or whatever you call them these days, had perfect eyesight to the day they died. They could see anything anywhere, and they certainly didn't have any glasses. And there are any number of examples of of indigenous and old kind of cultures that civilizations that didn't eat what we do today, don't act like we do today, don't have the electromagnetic fields. I don't know what it all is, but certainly didn't eat sugar like we do today, and so on. And so what I know is, in theory, that you probably should be able to, you don't need any glasses. You ought to have perfect eyesight in the end. And this is an interesting way. This is Bruce Lipton, right? Bruce Lipton says, how you think drives everything in your body. All of the way you feel, the way your disease or not, or your effectiveness, all of it is mental. I've been in a room with him, and somebody made some comment, and he said, "It's none of that stuff. It's not pills. It's not blah blah blah." And, he's surrounded by all kinds of good guys, like that are friends of mine and so on, who come to transition talks and say, try my supplements and try my other kinds of stuff. And Bruce Lipton works on this higher level that we're talking about and says, change your mind. Everything else downstream changes. You don't have to go down and take pills and other kinds of things. Just change your mind and it all happens. And that, it seems to me, is the essence of what this the the whole operating space of this new human is that we see ourselves and we see this reality in a fundamentally different way, such that we are unencumbered by all of the stuff that for centuries and centuries have built up and encrusted around us. And we break through into this other space, well, that is largely defined by love and other similar kinds of feelings, and get you 100, 1,000 or more years of peace if you want to. And so that's really quite interesting and exciting to me. So thank you.